All right, get ready to go deep. Today, we're tackling meta-analysis.
You know, it's funny. It's like we're trying to see the whole forest, but we're stuck looking at individual leaves.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
This paper we're using as our guide today, it's all about what makes a meta-analysis really great.
Award-winning, even.
Right, award-winning. And they use this example of diversity in teams, which, I mean, that's a hot topic these days.
Oh, absolutely.
But what I found interesting is that they really dig into the...
Like, how do we even study this stuff?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because it's not as simple as just, like, throwing a bunch of studies together, right?
No, not at all. It's like they say in the paper, we're dealing with a Tower of Babel when it comes to research.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Break that down for me.
So imagine all this incredible research being done, but it's all using different languages, different terms, even for the same concepts.
So even if we agree on, like, what diversity means, we can't be sure everyone's measuring it the same way.
That's the problem, and that's where this thing they call the construct identity fallacy comes in. We think we're comparing apples to apples, but some of them are, a little bit pear-shaved.
Oh, so our whole meta-analysis could be skewed if we're not careful about that right from the start.
Precisely.
Wow, okay. So how do we avoid that?
Well, the paper talks about this idea of Cattell's data cube. Think of it like a three-dimensional grid, and we can categorize all these studies based on things like the samples they use.
Really, who they studied.
Exactly, and what variables they looked at, and even when the research was done. It helps create a much clearer picture.
Okay, I'm starting to see how that would be helpful, but man, that sounds like a lot of work.
Oh, it definitely is.
Yeah.
This is not your casual literature review. And then we start getting into data dilemmas. Things like, what about those outliers?
Oh, yeah. The data points that are, like, way off the charts.
Exactly.
Sometimes they're super interesting, but sometimes they're just errors.
Could be either one. And the paper really stresses how important it is to be transparent about how you handle those outliers.
Oh, so people reading your meta-analysis can understand, like, okay, how did those outliers affect the overall results?
Exactly. Because they can really skew things if you're not careful.
And then, of course, there's the whole issue of publication bias.
Oh, yeah.
The idea that only the really exciting findings actually get published. Who wants to read a study that says nothing interesting happened?
Right. But that can really warp our view of reality.
Yeah, totally.
And the paper mentions these statistical techniques, things like Egger's regression test and PET-Ps. They're like tools that can help detect that publication bias.
Okay, so it's like we're putting on our detective hats and making sure that our meta-analysis isn't built on a biased sample of studies.
That's a great way to put it.
But even then, I imagine getting access to all that data in the first place can be a challenge.
Oh, for sure. Like, a lot of research relies on people sharing their data upon request, which,
Yeah. Good luck with that.
Right. But the open science movement, they're trying to change all that, making data publicly available right from the get-go.
Which makes sense to me, because it's not just about being able to replicate a study. It's about building on each other's work.
Exactly. Like, if I can look at your raw data, I might be able to answer a question that you hadn't even considered.
That's amazing.
And that's really the whole point of good meta-analysis. It's about shifting the focus from individual achievements to this bigger picture of collaborative progress. And that's what's so cool about this. We're not just like summarizing the past. We're using it to build something for the future.
Oh, I see what you mean. Like those living systematic reviews the paper talks about.
Exactly. They're constantly being updated as new research comes out, keeping pace with the science.
Yeah, like always having the latest software version, but for knowledge.
That's a great analogy because, like, even the best meta-analyses, they kind of have a shelf life.
Oh, interesting.
The authors even have this framework for deciding when it's time for an update, which, I mean, makes sense.
Science is always moving forward, so our understanding should too, right?
Right. Okay, so we've got this solid foundation of data. We've checked for biases. What then? Like, how do we actually do the meta-analysis part?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
Well, it gets a bit more nuanced than just calculating averages. We're not just saying diversity is good or bad overall. We want to know when and how it makes a difference.
And that's where those moderators come in.
You got it.
Like maybe having different personality types is awesome for brainstorming.
Yeah.
But like not so great when you're trying to get really detailed planning done.
Exactly. And there's this technique called MASM, stands for Meta-Analytic Structural Equation Modeling. It helps us map out those relationships between all the different variables.
Oh, okay. So it's more like a network.
Yeah, like a network diagram. You can see how different factors influence each other.
That's cool.
So instead of just saying, diversity leads to better performance, we can say, well, this type of diversity in this context leads to this specific outcome.
Wow, that's way more useful, right?
It is. It gives us that nuance. That's what makes a meta-analysis really insightful.
So we've done all this amazing work. We've got our findings. What about actually, like, reporting the results? How do we share it with the world?
Well, the paper's really big on transparency here. Like, imagine you're writing a recipe. Anyone should be able to follow your steps and get the same results.
That's reproducibility, right?
Exactly. And with open science, you can even share your whole data set, right alongside the paper.
So other researchers can play around with the data, maybe find something you missed.
Absolutely. That kind of scrutiny just makes the findings stronger.
And having that solid meta-analysis out there, I bet it can really shape future research in the field.
Absolutely. It's not just about summarizing what we do know, it's about highlighting what we don't know.
The unknowns.
Yeah, the gaps. The authors even suggest, like, write your future research directions as if you were in charge of the whole field.
Wow, that's a cool way to think about it.
Right. Pointing out those unanswered questions, the areas that are just ripe for exploration.
So it's like a roadmap for discovery.
And that's what makes this so exciting. It's constantly evolving, always building on what came before to light the way forward.
I love that. But hey, didn't we start talking about this team diversity example?
We did, and there's some fascinating stuff in there. Let's unpack that a bit more.
All right, so we talked about all the how of meta-analysis. Now let's get to the good stuff. What do they actually find out about diversity in teams?
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting. We have to go beyond these simple statements, like diversity good or diversity bad.
Because it really depends on what kind of diversity.
Yeah, exactly. And the paper, it talks about this difference between surface level diversity and deep level diversity.
Oh, yeah, break that down.
So surface level is all the stuff you can, see right away, demographics, that kind of thing. But deep level diversity, that's more about values, beliefs, personality types.
So, you could have a team that looks diverse, but everyone still thinks the same way.
Right. And it turns out that deep level diversity, that's what's really linked to all the good stuff. The creativity, the problem solving.
But it's not always easy, right? I mean, diverse teams, they can have more conflict too.
True. But the paper, it points out that conflict isn't always a bad thing. Like, some studies found that conflict is higher early on when the team's first forming.
Oh, so as people get to know each other.
Exactly. That conflict tends to go down. So maybe a little friction at the start actually leads to, stronger bonds later on.
That's interesting. And that's something you might miss if you were just looking at one study.
Totally. It's only when you combine all these different findings that you start to see these patterns emerge.
It makes you think, how much stuff do we just, accept as fact without really looking at the whole picture?
Right. And that's why meta-analysis is so important. It forces us to be more critical, to, question our assumptions.
So what's the takeaway for, anyone listening who works in a team? Should we all be trying to, maximize deep-level diversity?
Well, it's not quite that simple. It's like the paper says, the impact of diversity, it depends on so many factors.
Like what the team is actually doing.
Yeah, the task, the context, even the leadership style.
So there's no magic formula.
But understanding these nuances, that's how we can build better teams.
Make better decisions. I think that's a great point to wrap up on. This has been really eye-opening. I mean, meta-analysis, it's more than just a research method, right?
It's a way of thinking.
Yeah, a way of approaching problems, making sense of the world.
And that's what makes it so exciting, this constant process of exploration and discovery, always pushing the boundaries of knowledge.
So listeners, next time you see a research finding, don't just take it at face value, okay? Dig a little deeper, look for the context. And remember, science is always a work in progress.
And hey, maybe you'll even be inspired to try your own meta-analysis someday.
Until next time, keep asking those questions, keep learning, and keep diving deep